There is a photograph that was never supposed to be developed. It shows a woman standing at the edge of a tree line in Darrington, Washington, her hand raised as if waving goodbye. The man who took it burned the negative 3 days later, but someone had already made a copy. That woman was Margaret Holloway, a schoolteacher from Seattle. She walked into a hunting cabin on the north ridge of the Cascade foothills in late October of 1947. She has not been seen since, not by her family, not by the police, not by anyone. What happened in that cabin was never officially explained. But the people who lived in Darrington at the time, they knew. They just didn't talk about it. Until now. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is the account of a real woman who vanished from the American wilderness under circumstances so strange, so deeply disturbing, that even the detectives assigned to her case requested transfers within 6 months. Her name was erased from local records. Her family was told to stop asking questions, and for 77 years, the official explanation has been the same. She got lost in the woods. But Margaret Holloway was an experienced hiker. She carried a compass, a map, and a whistle. She told 3 separate people exactly where she was going, and she left behind something in that cabin that the authorities refuse to acknowledge to this day. A diary, 17 pages, written in the span of less than 48 hours. What she described in those pages was not a disappearance. It was something else entirely. Something that suggests she did not leave that cabin alone, and more disturbingly, that she may have never wanted to leave at all. This is the story of Margaret Holloway, and this is the story that was buried with her. Margaret Holloway was 31 years old in the autumn of 1947. She had been teaching 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Seattle for nearly 8 years. By all accounts, she was competent, well-liked, and unremarkable in the way that most devoted teachers are. She lived alone in a modest apartment on Capitol Hill. She attended church on Sundays. She wrote letters to her younger sister in Spokane every other week. She was, by the standards of post-war America, exactly what a single woman in her 30s was expected to be. Quiet, dependable, invisible. But there was something beneath that surface, something her colleagues noticed but rarely mentioned. Margaret had a habit of staring out windows during faculty meetings. She would lose track of conversations mid-sentence, her gaze drifting toward the mountains visible from the school's eastern halls. She kept hiking boots under her desk. She marked trails on topographic maps during her lunch breaks. One of her fellow teachers later told investigators that Margaret once said she felt more real in the wilderness than she ever did in the city. That the trees understood her in a way people never could. It was the kind of statement that might seem poetic, unless you knew what happened next. Margaret had been planning the trip for months. She told her principal she needed a long weekend to clear her head. She told her sister she was visiting an old friend in Everett. She told the clerk at the general store in Darrington that she was meeting someone at the cabin. But when pressed later, the clerk could not remember if Margaret had used a name, or if she had simply said, him. The cabin itself was owned by a logging family named Gritson. They had not used it in over 2 years. It was remote, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound 3 miles into the forest. There was no electricity, no running water, no neighbors for miles. It was the kind of place you went when you wanted to disappear. And that is exactly what Margaret Holloway did. She arrived in Darrington on the afternoon of October 23rd. She bought supplies, canned goods, matches, lantern oil, a notebook with a leather cover. The last person to see her alive was a gas station attendant named Dutch Calloway. He later recalled that she seemed calm, almost too calm. He said she smiled at him when she paid, but her eyes looked past him, like she was already somewhere else. She drove her Ford coupe up the logging road as far as it would go, then continued on foot. By nightfall, she had reached the cabin, and by morning, everything had changed. The diary was found 4 months later by a pair of hunters who had broken into the cabin to escape a snowstorm. They were not looking for evidence. They were not looking for anything except warmth. But when they pushed open the door, they found the notebook lying open on the table, its pages stiff with cold and damp. They read it by flashlight. And according to the police report filed 2 days later, both men refused to return to the woods alone for the rest of their lives. The first entry is dated October 23, 1947. Margaret's handwriting is steady, clear, almost cheerful. She writes about the hike, the quality of the light through the trees, the smell of pine and wet earth. She describes the cabin as smaller than she expected, but peaceful. She writes that she feels safe here, that she feels seen. That last word, seen, is underlined twice. She makes no mention of anyone else being present, but in the margin, written in smaller script, almost as an afterthought, she adds, "He was waiting when I arrived. There is no explanation of who he is, no physical description, no name, just that single sentence, isolated and strange." The next few paragraphs detail mundane things. She unpacks her supplies, she lights the stove, she boils water for tea, she sits at the table and watches the darkness gather outside the window. Then, near the bottom of the page, her tone shifts. She writes, "I thought I would be afraid, but I'm not. He told me I wouldn't be. He told me I'd understand once I was here. And I do. I finally do." The second entry begins that same night, though the handwriting is slightly different. The letters are more angular, pressed harder into the paper. She writes that she can hear him moving in the other room, though she also notes that the cabin is a single room. She writes that he speaks to her without using words, that his voice comes from inside her own thoughts, that it feels like remembering something she has always known. She writes, "He says I've been looking for him my whole life, that everyone who comes here is looking for him, that some people call it getting lost, but it's really the opposite. It's being found." At the bottom of that page, there is a sentence that was later circled in red ink by the detective who processed the diary as evidence. It reads, "He says I can leave whenever I want, but I won't want to." The entry dated October 24th begins in the early morning. Margaret writes that she did not sleep, not because she was restless, but because sleep felt unnecessary. She describes sitting at the table through the entire night, watching the window, watching the shape of the trees against the sky. She writes that time moved differently in the cabin, that hours felt like minutes, that silence had texture. She writes, "I keep thinking I should be hungry or cold, but I'm not. I feel full, I feel warm, like something is taking care of me from the inside." She makes no mention of eating. She makes no mention of lighting a fire. The hunters who found the diary noted that the stove was cold when they arrived, and that the canned goods she had purchased were still stacked unopened on the shelf. Investigators later confirmed that none of the food had been touched. The matchbox was full, the lantern had not been lit. Margaret had spent at least 2 nights in a cabin with no heat, no light, and no food. And according to her own words, she had felt perfectly at ease. The tone of the diary begins to change around midday. Her sentences grow longer, more fragmented. She begins to repeat certain phrases. "He is showing me. He is teaching me. He is letting me see." At one point, she writes an entire paragraph that is nothing but the word "yes," written over and over in narrow, shaking lines. Then, abruptly, the handwriting returns to normal. She writes, "I asked him what he wants from me. He said he doesn't want anything. He said I'm the one who wanted. I'm the one who came looking. And now I've found it. Now I've found him. And he says that's enough. That's all it ever needed to be." There is a gap in the entries after that. Several pages are blank. Then, near the middle of the notebook, the writing resumes. The date is unclear. Margaret writes that she tried to leave, that she walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. But when she looked back, the cabin was gone. She writes that the forest looked the same in every direction, that the trail she had taken to reach the cabin no longer existed. She writes, "I walked for hours, maybe days. I don't know anymore. But every time I stopped, I could hear him calling, not with sound, with feeling. And eventually I turned around, and the cabin was there again, right in front of me, like it had been waiting." She writes that she went back inside, that she sat down at the table, that she did not try to leave again. And then in careful, deliberate letters she writes, I don't think I'm supposed to. Margaret Holloway was reported missing on October 28, 1947. Her sister had called the school when Margaret failed to return from her long weekend. The principal contacted the Seattle Police Department. A search was organized within 48 hours. By November 1st, a team of 12 men, including 2 county sheriffs and a wilderness tracker named Ernest Haywood, had traced her route to the Gritson cabin. They found her car parked at the end of the logging road, keys still in the ignition. They found her footprints in the soft earth leading up the trail. And then, less than half a mile from the cabin, the footprints stopped. Not faded, not obscured by weather, stopped, as if Margaret Holloway had simply ceased to walk. The tracker, Ernest Haywood, later testified that he had never seen anything like it. He said the prints ended mid-stride, both feet visible in the dirt, and then nothing. No scuff marks, no signs of a struggle, no indication she had been picked up or dragged. The ground beyond that point was untouched. He said it looked like she had evaporated. When pressed by investigators, he refused to offer any other explanation. He only said, "Something took her between steps." The search team reached the cabin by early afternoon. The door was unlocked. Inside, they found her coat folded neatly on the back of a chair, her canteen, still half full, sitting on the table, her hiking boots placed side by side near the door, laces tied. But no Margaret. No signs of violence. No blood. No torn clothing. Nothing to suggest anything had gone wrong. Except for one thing. The air inside the cabin smelled wrong. Multiple members of the search party mentioned it in their reports. They described it as sweet, rotting, like flowers left too long in a closed room. One officer wrote that the smell made him nauseous. Another said it reminded him of the funeral home where his mother had been waked. The scent was so overpowering that the men opened every window and propped the door wide. But even hours later, standing outside, they said they could still taste it. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The diary was not discovered during that initial search. It was not on the table. It was not on the shelves. It was not anywhere the investigators looked. But 4 months later, when those 2 hunters opened the door, it was lying in plain sight, open, waiting. The police returned to process the scene a second time. They photographed the diary. They catalogued the entries. And then, for reasons never made public, they sealed the case. Margaret Holloway was declared legally dead in 1953. The official cause was listed as exposure and presumed animal predation. But the detective who closed the file, a man named Robert Finch, told his daughter years later that he did not believe a word of it. He told her that Margaret Holloway had not died in those woods. He said she had gone somewhere else, somewhere the rest of them could not follow. The last pages of Margaret Holloway's diary are the ones that were never released to the public. They were redacted from the official case file. They were not shown to her family, and they were never mentioned in the newspapers that ran her disappearance as a tragic hiking accident. But in 1998, a retired archivist named Laura Kinsey found a photocopy of the complete diary in a mislabeled box at the Washington State Archives. She made a duplicate before the original was reclaimed. That copy has circulated quietly among researchers ever since, and what it contains is not the writing of a woman lost in the wilderness. It is the writing of a woman who had found exactly what she came for. The entry that follows the blank pages is no longer dated. Margaret's handwriting has changed again. The letters are smaller now, cramped, crowded together as if she is trying to fit as many words as possible on each line. She writes, "He showed me what I really am. Not the teacher, not the sister, not the woman in the apartment who pretends to be alive. He showed me the part of me that was always here, the part that belonged to this place before I was even born. He says everyone has it, that hollow space inside, that ache, but most people spend their whole lives trying to fill it with the wrong things. He says I'm lucky, because I stopped pretending." She writes that he told her the cabin was not a place, it was a threshold, that people had been coming here for longer than anyone remembered, that the Gritson family had not abandoned it. They had fled it. She writes that he explained the rules to her, that once you understand what the cabin is, once you see him clearly, you cannot leave the same way you came in. You can only leave by forgetting, And Margaret writes, in letters so small they are barely legible, "I don't want to forget." The next section is written in a different style entirely. No punctuation, no breaks between words, just a solid block of text that runs for 2 full pages. It is difficult to parse, but certain phrases repeat. He is not a man. He is older than the trees. He has been waiting so long. I was always meant to come here. Near the end of the block, one sentence is legible. He says, "If I stay, I will finally stop hurting." Then, abruptly, the handwriting returns to something close to normal. Margaret writes what appears to be a goodbye, but it is not addressed to her sister. It is not addressed to her colleagues or her students. It is addressed to no one. She writes, "If someone finds this, don't come looking for me. I'm not lost. I'm not trapped. I'm not waiting to be rescued. I am exactly where I need to be. For the first time in my entire life, I am exactly where I need to be. And I am not alone anymore." The final page contains only 5 words, written in the center of the paper in large, careful letters. He says, "I can stay." The Gritson cabin still stands. It was never torn down. It was never sold. The family who owned it simply walked away. Property records show that the land passed through 3 generations without a single visit. In 2006, the county attempted to seize it for back taxes, but the case was quietly dropped. No explanation was given. The logging road that leads to the trailhead has been gated off since 1959, but the gate is often found open, and the trail, despite decades of disuse, remains strangely clear, as if something, or someone, is keeping it passable. There have been other disappearances, not many, but enough to establish a pattern. In 1962, a graduate student from the University of Washington named Thomas Veers told his roommate he was going camping near Darrington. He never returned. His tent was found erected and intact. His sleeping bag was rolled neatly inside. His journal contained a single entry that read, "I feel like I've been here before." In 1979, a woman named Caroline Durst, a librarian from Bellingham, was reported missing after a solo hiking trip in the same region. Her car was found, her pack was found, but Caroline was not. A note in her handwriting was discovered tucked inside her field guide to Pacific Northwest flora. It said, "Don't worry, I finally understand." The local population does not talk about the cabin. When researchers or journalists arrive in Darrington asking questions, they are met with silence, or misdirection, or polite suggestions to leave. In 2011, a documentary crew attempted to film at the site. They were warned by a local forestry worker not to go. When they ignored him and hiked to the cabin anyway, their footage showed nothing unusual. Just an old structure, rotting wood, broken windows. But when they reviewed the audio later, beneath the ambient noise of wind and birds, there was something else. A voice, low, rhythmic, speaking in a language none of them recognized. The crew dissolved the project shortly after. One of the cameramen later said he could still hear that voice in his sleep, that it sounded like it was calling his name. Margaret Holloway's sister, Elizabeth, spent the rest of her life trying to find answers. She wrote letters to the governor. She hired private investigators. She visited Darrington 17 times. On her final visit, in 1983, a local woman in her 70s approached Elizabeth outside the general store. The woman said her father had been part of the original search party in 1947. She said he told her, on his deathbed, that they had found something else in the cabin that day. Something they did not put in the report. A second set of footprints, bare feet, impossibly large, leading from the center of the room to the door, and then stopping, just like Margaret's had, as if whatever made them had simply decided it no longer needed to walk. Elizabeth asked what happened to the evidence. The woman said her father told her it was burned, that the men agreed, without speaking, that some things were not meant to be documented. Elizabeth died in 1991. She never stopped believing her sister was alive, somewhere. The diary remains in a climate-controlled storage facility in Olympia. It has been examined by handwriting experts, psychologists, and linguists. None of them can agree on what it represents. Some believe Margaret suffered a psychotic break. Others suggest carbon monoxide poisoning or environmental toxins. But there is no consensus, and there is no closure. Only a leather notebook, and 17 pages that suggest Margaret Holloway did not vanish. She chose something the rest of us cannot see, something that has been waiting in those woods long before we had words for it. And if you listen carefully, if you go far enough into the silence, some people say you can still hear her, not calling for help, but calling others to follow. The cabin is still there, the trail is still open, and every few years, someone else decides to walk it. They tell their families they'll be back in a few days. They pack their supplies. They drive to Darrington, and then, quietly, without fanfare or warning, they step off the map. The forest does not give them back. It never has, because the forest is not keeping them. They are staying, just like Margaret did, just like she said she would. And somewhere, in a place we cannot name, they are not alone anymore. That is the story of Margaret Holloway, the teacher who walked into the Darrington cabin and was never seen again. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've ever felt that pull toward the wilderness, that need to walk into the trees and never come back, because maybe, just maybe, you're not the only one, and maybe that's what the cabin has been waiting for all along.